At the next scheduled Democratic debate, none of the Democratic candidates will be answering questions from Republicans, or from anyone else for that matter. In our fourth story in the Countdown, CBS has canceled the December 10th debate after our next guest, John Edwards, and other candidates said they would not cross the picket line of striking CBS writers. Of course, that does not prevent any particular Democrat from weighing in on last night's Republican debate, in which at least one Democrat was somehow allowed to ask a question, or from weighing in on any of the embarrassments plaguing Mr. Giuliani like a plague of locusts, or about, say, Mr. Romney's flip-flops about Muslims or abortion or anything else. As promised, joining us now from Iowa City and the campaign trail, the former senator and current Democratic presidential candidate, John Edwards. Senator, great thanks for your time tonight.
Glad to be with you, Keith.
The American people today are rising up, demanding to know how at least one Democrat somehow slipped through the system last night. I'll resist the temptation to ask you that question about how the Republicans can answer al-Qaeda if they can't answer a Democrat. Instead, can you tell us for the record whether you have any contingency plans in place if, heaven forbid, sometime in the future, someone who's not a Democrat, even maybe an actual registered Republican, were somehow able to ask you a question?
Heaven forbid. I mean, how could we possibly survive if somebody who is antagonistic or has a different point of view than you do asks you a question? And no, we can't possibly expect somebody who answers questions from either independents or the other party to get elected president of the United States. How could anybody be ready to do that? I think this whole discussion is ridiculous.
What do you, speaking of ridiculous, what do you see as the biggest gift the Republicans have handed all the Democratic candidates, including yourself, up to and including last night, and what can the party do as it starts to focus on the actual general election of 2008?
I think two things. One is they really, when it comes to the war, they sound like, to me, they sound like Bush on steroids. I mean, they've given us such a clear choice. You know, I've said clearly that I'll get all combat troops out and end the combat missions in my first year, and they're going to continue the war indefinitely, the best I can tell. And if Americans actually want this war in Iraq to continue for another decade or so, they should vote for the Republican. If they want it to end, they want the war ended, they should vote for me. And I think that clear choice is something the American people are going to have next fall. And then second, I didn't get to see the debate, but I heard that Mitt Romney said something about the two Americas that I've talked about in the past and how he doesn't think they exist. You know, what planet does this guy live on? I mean, all you got to do is pay any attention to what's going on. The middle class is having trouble paying their bills. Their wages are stagnant. We got 37 million people who live in poverty. We got 35 million people who went hungry last year. And he thinks that everybody's doing great. That's not the real world. And they are completely out of touch with what's actually happening and the fact that we have very well-financed, very powerful interests in Washington that have in many ways taken over the government and the democracy against the interests of most people in this country.
You would think that even the two Americas that are constituted solely by those who are having their homes foreclosed on and those who are not would have registered in that debate last night. But there's a breaking news story. You mentioned Iraq. There's a breaking story about what Australia is going to do. The Prime Minister-elect, Kevin Rudd, who just succeeded or will succeed John Howard, who won weekend before last in the election, has just said it is his intent to, by the middle of next year, it's not a huge contingent, but it's 550 troops. He intends to get the Australian troops out of Iraq by the middle of next year. Do you have a reaction to that? Is that the kind of thing that builds momentum towards ending this thing?
It's not surprising at all. I mean, he's seen what's happening in Iraq. He sees what all of us see, that there's no serious progress toward a political reconciliation between Sunni and Shia. Everyone, including the bipartisan Iraq study group, have recognized that unless there's a political compromise, there can't be stability, there can't be an end to the violence, and America needs to be leaving. These people are going to eventually have to take responsibility for their own country, and I think we've reached that stage. And so I'm not at all surprised. I hadn't heard the news, but it doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, it just happened a couple of minutes ago. Apparently, he made a speech in Sydney. Something that happened in a speech in Iowa during the week resulted in a lot of debate on the Democratic primary trail, whether President Clinton supported the invasion of Iraq or not, and he claimed not. I've been trying to figure out, does it matter? And if so, to whom and why?
Well, it may matter to President Clinton. I mean, he's a very well-known national figure. I don't think it matters for the presidential race. I mean, he's not on the ballot. Senator Clinton's on the ballot. We've talked about the differences, the policy differences we have on this issue. I do believe we got to, in my first year in office, I have to get the combat troops out, and we got to end combat missions. She has a different view about keeping combat troops there and continuing combat missions, and she's entitled to that view. But I think that view, those differences, give voters choices in the primary election. But I don't think most people understand that President Clinton is not on the ballot, and it's Senator Clinton who's on the ballot.
Last point. This has been raised in Iowa by you, summarized by something that's phrased on the internet as this is an election, not an auction. You're addressing this subject of raising funds and pledging. Explain that, if you would.
Well, I don't think that Iowa caucus goers, New Hampshire primary voters, South Carolina primary voters, Nevada caucus goers, I don't think they're going to vote for somebody just because they raise the most money. In fact, in some ways, that runs against what the Democratic Party is supposed to represent. We don't win elections. I heard your earlier discussion. We don't win elections by raising the most money. We win elections on principle, by doing what's right, by actually being the party of the people, not by being the candidate who's actually raised the most money. So I'm proud of the fact that I agreed to take public financing for this presidential primary election. I did it for a reason, and I think that actually caucus goers and primary voters are going to decide who's telling them the truth about Washington and who will fight for them.
John Edwards taking time out from the campaign in Iowa to talk with us this evening. Always a pleasure, Senator. Great. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Keith.